We're gonna go over one of the most asked questions on my channel, and it might just help you catch a few more fish with this thing right here. So welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name's Jesse. Today I wanted to talk about a question that I get asked all the time, and that is about this particular fly rod right here. It might look like a normal fly rod, but it is, well, let's see, it's 12 feet long, and it's called a Spey rod. But this is a little bit different. So this is actually a trout Spey, just a smaller Spey rod. Traditionally, these rods were 13 to 16 feet long, if not longer. So today we're gonna be going over how I set up my Spey rod to be specifically used for trout and landlocked salmon. These rods aren't really well known in Maine waters, but it has a few specific purposes that you can actually catch more fish using this rod. These rods can solve a couple different problems for us here in Maine. One is the fact that they are all based around roll cast. So I'm sure most everyone knows what a roll cast is. It's a very useful cast, especially in Maine, because we have a lot of overhanging branches that really prevent us from getting a nice long back cast in order to shoot out into a middle of a pool. So a Spey cast is really an emphasized version of a roll cast. There's a couple different components to it, but it's pretty simple to learn, and these micro Speys or trout Speys are actually really forgiving and a great way to learn how to Spey cast. Another thing that I find really useful about this is if something is really far for a single-handed rod, you have to be a pretty good caster to get a lot of distance, and you also need room behind you in order to shoot that far. But the Spey rod allows you to cast really far and reach areas that other people just simply can't. So I find a lot of unpressured fish sitting out in the middle of pools, and it's also opened up a lot of water that I was never able to reach before getting a Spey rod. So if you are thinking about picking up a new fly rod, or maybe you want to learn a new technique, a trout Spey rod might actually be a good tool to add to your arsenal, because you can actually reach new locations, you can learn a new method of fishing, and it's just simply a lot of fun to cast. We're gonna get into how I set up my specific Spey rod. Getting into this for the first time, things can be a little bit confusing because you run into some new terminology. Rod weights and reel sizes are a little bit different with these. Now this is a Redington hydrogen trout Spey, and it's 11 foot 6 inches long, which is a relatively manageable size. So you could one-hand this if you really wanted. And the nice thing about the trout Speys is they are very forgiving. If you were to go straight to a Spey rod, there's definitely gonna be a huge learning curve, and there will be a learning curve with this, but I found that the trout Spey was an awesome thing to learn on. I never really had a hard time picking it up. It's hard to master, but you can get pretty good casts, I would say, within a day, especially if you can go out with a guide or someone you know that has one that maybe can show you a thing or two, which I was fortunate to have. So when it comes to Spey rods, there's a couple different things about them that's important to know. Now, this is a 4-weight, and it's actually equivalent to a 6-weight. So whenever you're looking at a Spey rod, whatever weight it says it is, let's say it's a 3-weight, that's going to equate to a 5-weight. So with a single-handed rod, if you were thinking in terms of a single-hand rod, let's say you wanted to fish with a 6-weight, then you would pick up a 4-weight Spey rod. So look at it that way, whatever weight you need for the species. A lot of people use a 5-weight in Maine to fish trout and salmon. So you'd want a 3-weight Spey rod. Now I went with the 4 because I like to cast a little bit heavier line. It allows me to shoot a little further, and it also allows me to use bigger streamers. So that's why I went with a 4-weight. That's kind of a personal decision, whether you want a 3-weight or a 4-weight. I think both are excellent choices for Maine waters. The next thing we need to cover is the reel. Now this is a 4-weight rod, but I have a 7/8-weight Redington rise to pair with it. And the reason is because we need a large arbor reel in order to hold this thicker line. Because the Spey rod works off of roll casts, it actually uses a thicker line known as a shooting head in order to propel your cast forward. And in order to hold that type of line, you need a large arbor reel. So in my particular case, you can see that it's not necessarily balanced right on the edge of the cork. It's a little bit forward. If that matters to you, there you go. I personally don't care. Especially with a 2-handed rod, you have 2 hands on this to begin with. The important thing is that you have a large arbor reel that's going to be able to hold that thicker line. For instance, if you were to go with a 3-weight trout spey, I might recommend getting a 5 or a 6-weight reel, probably a 6-weight. Let's talk about the line a little bit. So this is kind of where people get lost. We have our shooting head, and that is the thick part of the line. So there's 2 different major classes of spey shooting heads. So we have a Skagit head, which is what I use the most, and is typically used for fishing streamers. Skagit heads are typically more blunt. They're very weight forward, meant to cast through the wind, carry large flies. The other class is called a Scandinavian line. Now this has more of a taper to it. It's made for presenting more delicate flies, like swinging wet flies or even skating or fishing dry flies. So which one you decide on really depends on how you want to fish and your fishing style. As far as selecting a line goes, these differ from single-handed lines in that they're measured in grams, not by weight. So when you buy a rod, no matter what weight it is, it typically is going to tell you what shooting heads it's designed to be cast with. It's going to have grams written right on the side, and it's going to be in a range. So as a beginner, I'd suggest going on the upper end of this range. This is going to allow you to have a little more feel when you're loading that rod. And to me, I felt like that really helped me as a beginner because you get to understand the concept of loading your rod, but you don't want to overdo it for your rod. So stick in that recommended range. I would just suggest going to the upper end of that range. So I hope that helps. Fly lines for spey rods are super technical. I'm still learning about them every day. But as a beginner, it's always a good concept just to get your foot in the door, get an understanding with the line that you're working with. And that's going to be what you base all your knowledge on going forward. So you have an idea of what people are talking about and maybe how another line can better serve your needs. But we're not out of the weeds yet. You're also going to need a running line if you decide to buy shooting heads that are independent of your running line if you want to go that route. And that allows you a little more flexibility. You can use larger or smaller shooting heads. But for me, when I was beginning, I decided to go with an integrated line. Just so no, you won't be able to swap out the shooting heads, but chances are if you're new, you're not going to do that. You spool it on just as you would any other fly line and you're ready to go. So we've talked about the rod I use, the reel, and the line, but there's a couple more things to go over. One thing to mention is this. So this is a Motip, and this is going to help your line either sink or float depending on what you use. So what I have on right now is a T8 Motip. These are typically 10 feet long, and it helps propel your line. It gives you a little distance between your fly and your shooting head. And these shooting heads are designed to be cast with a Motip, so you are going to want to pick one up. And they come in a lot of different options. So I have this case to carry, all my different Motips. I think I have 3 of them in here now. So I have a pure floating one, which would be used with the Scandinavian line. So this one has 5 feet of floating section, and then 5 feet of T8 sink tip. And then I have another one that is 2.5 float and 7.5 feet of T8 sink tip. I mostly use the T8 sink tip because when I use my spey rod, typically I want to get pretty deep, which is why I use an intermediate Skagit line paired with the T8 Motip. So off of that, a lot of times you will put a spey swivel here, and the motions you use while spey casting can really cause a lot of line twists, so you may want to consider getting a few of those swivels. I'm going to link those down below as well. Off of my Motip, of course, we have our leader. Now I like to use 3 or 2x depending on the type of fish that you're after. I usually put about 2 to 3 feet down to the fly. I feel like this setup in particular is good middle ground. It's not super expensive, it's not super cheap. Redington makes a lot of rods in that category, so I do tend to purchase them quite a bit. This whole setup is going to be linked down below, so if you want to fish the exact same rod that I am, there's going to be links to them down below. I have a lot of success with this. I really enjoy it. Worked its way into my arsenal of fly gears quite well. The first year I got it, I was obsessed with it. It was the only thing I used, and then the next year I kind of realized its true purposes and where it shined, and I would take it out in those cases, or if I just felt like casting it, because it truly is a blast to cast these rods. I hope that helped you, and if you're thinking about picking up a new rod, maybe the trout spey is the way to go. It's a lot of fun to cast and can definitely have a place in your fly fishing arsenal. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you found the video useful, make sure you go down below, hit that like button. It'll encourage me to make more of these informational videos for you guys, and I will catch you in the next one.